Welcome to the Habit Chess Podcast. My name is Misbah Hawk, and on this show, I like to talk about training the strength and conditioning of skills so that you can make moves when they matter. I have over 10 years of coaching experience with executives, athletes, and high performers from all walks of life. In today's episode, I'm going to be going over a fitness principle or concept that I use regularly from day one when I was 17, starting out in the fitness industry. And it's this idea of progression and regression. And this is something that you can, of course, apply to your own fitness regimen if you are, using it to do that. And if that's a skill that you are working on. But for me, I'm encouraging you, hopefully in this episode, to take fitness and movement and use it as a mental model for applying it to other things, or recognize patterns in unfamiliar territory and have a foundation for being able to move yourself through those progressions. Because the one thing that is a guarantee over the next couple years and decades to come is that we are going to be expected to learn new things and learn them faster. So whether you are using new software, whether you're building an agent for your team, or whether you are polishing up your presentation skills, or maybe even you're getting better at just talking about yourself, you are interviewing at different places and trying to land a new job. It's like, okay, getting back into the habit of, okay, what have I done? How do I communicate that? These are all little skills and problems that we are going to encounter in our day-to-day. And so having a mental model for being able to move yourself through these progressions can make it a little bit more sane, right? It can feel a little less anxious. It can feel a little more systematic, the exact way that a workout program does. And so I want to use an example that you might be able to envision, which is a push-up. I'm sure you'll agree with me. A push-up is easier said than done. If you've ever worked with new or deconditioned clients, just, starting to work out again after quite a few years or quite a few months, being able to jump right into a push-up is not something that's going to happen, and definitely not being able to pump out, sets of 10 like we might be envisioning. And so how do you get somebody to build the skill of a push-up? And so we start with something like a forearm plank, which is you just being on your forearms and doing a plank in a static position, just getting familiar, right? Getting comfortable in that space. Notice your shoulders kind of engaging and working. Notice that, oh, wow, my abs are now engaged and working. Okay, now let's make it a little bit harder, right? Whether that is in your next session or whether that is in week 2, going from a forearm plank to a straight arm plank. Okay, so now you're in a straight arm plank, which is a very similar position to a push-up. And we want to develop some stability in these positions before we start going too dynamic and crazy. Because what can happen? Your joints, your ligaments, your whole body is just not prepared to be able to take on your entire body weight right off the bat. And so you want to avoid tweaking your wrist, right? And so that straight arm plank is going to be something that, hey, you have really tight wrists from typing all day. You're not usually in this flexed back position. So before we go ahead and just put all 100, 200 pounds of body weight, down onto these wrists, it's like, let's get comfortable being able to support ourselves there first. So now we're going to go to knee push-up negatives. Now you're not even doing a full push-up on the knees yet. What you're doing is just practicing a very stable, core position, and you're practicing the negative or eccentric part of the movement. And this is where the muscles break down and they're really working, right? And so being able to really develop control in these areas is ironically how it helps you with the concentric phase and being able to come back up. So we might go from knee push-up negatives to normal push-up negatives. Or if from knee push-up negatives to the normal push-up negatives are just too big of a jump, right? It's too much for that person. What you could do is go to incline box push-ups. So when you have, let's say, a 24, 30-inch box, being able to, hold yourself on it like this. And now you're doing it in a very angled position. You could even do it on, a bench where you would do, a bench press, for example, but that is lower to the ground. It's going to be a little bit harder, right? So notice that we could manipulate how hard the incline push-up is based off of just the height, right? We could lower the height and bring it closer and closer to the ground until you feel like, oh, okay, cool. This is very similar to me doing a normal push-up negative. And then, okay, cool. We might come back to the push-up negative and now really try to do full reps, right? Now, I just gave you very clean movement specific progressions for the push-up, but there are so many other things that you can use to work on these same skills. It's not just limited to these exact exercises or these exact progressions. What you're gonna find along the way are limiters. So you're gonna notice, okay, cool, I could do the incline push-ups fine, but now all of a sudden, when I'm back on the ground, it looks like my back is broken after a couple reps. And so, okay, what does that reveal to us? Maybe there is some core stability that is missing. So now we begin to think, how do we practice that core stability in other scenarios and environments? We'll of course have these movements that allow us to very specifically train as close as we can get to the pattern of a push-up, but you can use other tools, right? You could do things like dead bugs or Russian twists. And what's really cool about this is along the way, you're going to discover limiters. So it might be in between one of these progressions. When you go from a forearm plank to a full straight arm plank, that might be where you notice, whoa, my back looks broken. Like it looks like I have no core stability here, right? So what does that tell you? Okay, well, we need to do more volume there. We need to get really good at being able to solidify that before we progress onto something more complicated. This way of viewing progressions and regressions becomes increasingly important the more complex the full skill or movement is. So when I was competing in Olympic weightlifting, that was an area where you're practicing two main lifts, right? The snatch and the clean and jerk. Technically, three lifts if you break it down, but snatch and clean and jerk. And there are all these variations that you are doing to improve just these two lifts, and they are very dynamic. There's a lot going on in just a second, right? So you are breaking down that movement in such a crazy variety of ways where it is very specific to those movements, like you're doing power snatches or power cleans or jerks off blocks, right? But then you have other movements that you will do to kind of strengthen the whole, right? As you find these limiters. So for example, I realized pretty quickly, oh wow, I can get this weight above over my head in something like the jerk. But once I got it overhead, my core, you could literally see my cores and hips like wiggling because I could barely support the weight that was overhead. So I had the speed to get under the bar, right? And, lock it out and hold the weight overhead. But I did not have the stability, whether that was in my core, whether that was in my hips, there was a limiter somewhere. And so that is the feedback that you are looking for when you are training a new skill. And it might come right off the bat when you experience a new progression where you're like, whoa, that was too hard, right? Going from the incline box push-up to a normal push-up on the floor, too big of a jump, right? So we begin to look at, okay, how can we train this pattern? And so for somebody who can't get themselves back up off the floor on a push-up and you're practicing those negatives, well, let's give the feeling of being able to push back up, right? Reduce some of that friction and some of that load. You can do that by an incline. You could even do it by practicing a bench press with a neutral grip, something that is very similar to what you might be, the positions that you might be in when you are doing a push-up. Now, of course, it's a different movement. There are different mechanics at play, but still, if you go into it with the intention of, okay, I'm trying to train my upper pushing strength and I'm going to do it in this pattern and really try to connect it back to that full movement, guess what? It can go a long way. Pull-ups are another great example of this. A lot of people have a tough time just hanging on the bar. Their grip strength is the limiter before we can even talk about doing negatives or doing band assisted stuff. It's like the grip is just not there. So of course, the best thing to do to train that grip would be to do something movement specific, like an active bar hang or a passive bar hang. But let's say that you find, oh wow, okay, I can only hang for 2 seconds at a time and then I lose control and I fall. Okay, well, what's a way we can regress that? And not all regressions are just going backwards, right? You might still train this on another day where it's not a progression or regression compared to this movement at all. But in this case, if I'm using a regression to really strengthen the grip, one of the things I might do is do heavy weighted carries. And so you pick up a heavy dumbbells or heavy kettlebells and being able to simply hold on, of course the carries would be great if you could walk around with them, but even if you just stand in place with it, with something that is really heavy to hold, but of course that you can safely pick up off the floor, hold it for a minute, 2 minutes until your grip feels like completely giving out. And you will get to experience a very similar type of taxation on your grip the way that you would if you were, hanging in an active or passive hang. Again, it's different when you are doing carries by your side versus when we are holding ourselves up like this. It's different. But what's the point here? What are we trying to train? What's the problem? What's the limiter? It's the grip right now. Okay, it's not the full movement. So you really have to be nuanced about how you are programming some of these things for yourself in the context of skill development. The good news is that with movement, you might need an outside eye, a trainer or a coach to be able to see some of this stuff. But with developing a new skill, you can really look inwards and be your own coach. You can write your own program with some of this. Another example I wanted to share is a single leg Romanian deadlift. Standing on one leg, being able to hinge over and kind of, touch the floor and stand back up, for example. That movement, most people cannot stand on one leg without losing balance after a few seconds, let alone perform the full movement there with control. So I'm presented with two options. One is to train the balance, and two is to remove the element of balance. I would train the balance because long-term, that's something I want to develop to do the full movement anyways, right? But then we would remove the balance so that we could train the full movement with no friction, with no limiters. We can still get parts of that pattern in without this element of balance. And so how you would do that is, guess what? Hand assisted, right? So if you hold one hand onto something and then you perform a single leg RDL, you will feel way more in control. Now, another way to do that is by just doing a double leg RDL. Keep both feet on the floor, get decent at that first. Now, another way is a staggered stance, right? So where one leg or one foot is half a foot in front of the other and the other foot is half a foot back, and you're practicing a variation of that single leg RDL in a staggered stance. But let's say I now want to develop that balance. Okay, I'm ready to kind of train that balance and get better at it beyond just what's going to improve in doing the full reps. Well, one of the first things I could do is add something very specific to the full movement. So as you're doing that hand assisted single leg RDL, or maybe it's a staggered stance RDL, being able to add holds in the bottoms of those positions. So for example, where you're most unstable might be when you're fully standing up erect before you actually hinge. The next really unstable point is probably close to the end range at the bottom. So when you get to that end range, what if you held it for 10 seconds and just breathe through it, try to find control there? That's an example of training the balance. So all this to say, use this concept of progression and regression no matter what skill you are currently learning. Let's come back to improving your presentation or public speaking skills, right? That's going to be something that you could set up a 4-week program for yourself to be able to do that. Week 1, I do this. Week 2, I do this. Week 3, it's a little harder. Week 4, it's a little harder, right? Now, it's not only when you're really focused on developing the skill, it's not just going to be once a week, maybe for the 4 weeks. You might actually program 3 times a week for yourself to work on this for 4 weeks in a row. And each week or each session, you progress in a bit of a different way. So let's say one of the limiters you discover is, okay, I blank on what I'm going to say. I get really nervous and I have everything memorized. And then when I get up there, I blank. Okay, how are the different ways that we can begin to train that element of this skill, especially once you realize, whoa, this is the limiter? And I covered this in my episode on How to Do Things You Hate by Peter Hollins, where he talks about getting better at things requires being in this sweet spot of struggle, where if you are just doing perfect repetition of, like, let's say coming back to the movement example, if I'm just doing forearm planks over and over and over, and I'm not really challenging myself at any point with something a little bit harder, it doesn't have to be a completely different movement, right? It might be more sets. It might be more seconds of volume that you're accumulating in each set. There are a lot of ways that you can turn up the struggle for yourself, but it's very interesting to find that if you are not exposing yourself to that sweet spot of struggle, you're not really growing. And the fastest growth in learning a new skill happens when you are just in that sweet spot. It's not too difficult where it's killing you and ruining all motivation and you never show up again, but it also is really making your brain wrestle with the problem a little bit. Sitting with that has a way higher return than just rehearsing the same things that you know you're already good at. Now, my last note on this is that this is not a one and done thing, right? So for example, you don't just keep progressing and progressing forever. You want to look at progressions and regressions as cyclical. It happens in a cycle, whether it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, a year-long cycle, 2-year-long cycle, however long the cycle is, there is this inevitable time where you are going to come back to the forearm planks. And guess what? On certain days when you are more burnt out, like traditionally, let's say week 3 out of a 4-week program, you might be feeling it a little bit, right? It's really adding up a bit. So during those sessions, that forearm plank may feel just as challenging as it did in week 1. Even though now you're up on, stage 5 of the progressions and I'm doing all this cool stuff I didn't expect to, it's going to feel like, whoa, it went away. What happened? And so it's remembering that that's a part of the process, being able to regress things in real time, to be able to match the moment and what it needs is a skill. And then of course, being able to progress in a way that is gradual and that is sustainable. And in fitness, you would hurt yourself if you progressed too quickly. And when you hurt yourself, you're sidelined, you can't really do much, and it really sucks. So we don't want to do that with whatever new skill that you are learning. You don't want to sideline yourself for no reason. I find that the cyclical approach, whether you look at, your training cycle as a 4-week cycle, 8-week, 12-week cycle, whatever it is that's comfortable for you, looking at it in those blocks is going to make it much more manageable to revisit the fundamentals, revisit the basics, because that is something in skill development that is a common theme. As you become a master of your craft, the basics are still important. The foundations are still important. They might not look like it to you because it's like, oh, it's so flashy. This person's practicing and doing all these cool things, but they have a very, very solid understanding of the basics. This reminds me of something Kobe Bryant shared that he used to do, which was like, I think when he was 12 or 13, he wasn't very good at his jump shot. And so he literally all summer practiced on his jump shot. That was the only thing he did for those 8 to 12 weeks. And then once he was done his jump shot, it was like he moved on to the next skill, his next problem area that he wanted to improve. So pick one thing, pick something that is going to be a valuable new skill for you to add into your toolbox. There's unlimited options out there, right? It now just comes down to judgment, choosing the right skill that's going to hopefully enhance your skill stack, and then developing a program to develop that skill. So I hope this was useful. Make sure to reach out. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this episode, you can reach out hi@habitchess.com, and be sure to get signed up for the Habit Chess newsletter, which you can get in the description below. I appreciate you hanging out and taking the time, and I will see you on the next one.